Imagine a winter so cold, even the fires of rebellion froze for a moment. Imagine a people so hungry, they tore down an empire just to taste freedom. This is the story of the Russian Revolution, the uprising that shattered an empire, ended 3 centuries of Romanov rule, and gave birth to a new world order. In 1917, Russia was enormous, 11 time zones wide, a land of gold and grain, yet most of its people lived in hunger and misery. The Tsar ruled from his glittering palaces in Petrograd, believing himself chosen by God. But beneath the chandeliers and marble floors, the empire was rotting. The peasants worked endless fields they did not own. The industrial workers toiled 12, sometimes 14 hours a day in the choking smoke of factories. Bread was scarce, wages were low, and the dream of a better world began to take root. The whispers of revolution grew louder, in taverns, in workers' quarters, and in the dark alleys of Petrograd. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, refused to listen. He believed his throne was untouchable. He believed his soldiers would always obey. But the cracks in the empire had already begun to spread. The year was 1905. The first tremor of revolution struck when peaceful protesters, led by Father Gapon, marched to the Tsar's winter palace, carrying icons, portraits, and prayers for reform. They wanted bread. They wanted justice. They wanted to be heard. But the palace guards opened fire. It was a massacre. Bloody Sunday. Hundreds were killed. Thousands wounded. The blood of ordinary Russians stained the snow of St. Petersburg. And with it, the people's faith in the Tsar began to die. Over the next decade, Russia simmered with unrest. Strikes, protests, and secret political movements spread through the cities. Among them rose a small, determined group, the Bolsheviks, led by a man named Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was in exile then, hiding in Europe. But his words, sharp as daggers, found their way back home. He wrote of workers overthrowing their masters, of peasants seizing land, of a society run by the people, for the people. Few could imagine it then, but his ideas would soon set the world on fire. And then came the Great War, World War I. Russia entered it with pride and faith, marching beside its allies. But within months, faith turned into fury. Millions of soldiers died in frozen trenches. The army ran out of rifles, food, even boots. At home, the people starved. The Tsar's ministers grew rich while families buried their dead in silence. By early 1917, the empire was breaking apart. Soldiers were deserting. Workers were striking. Women were standing in bread lines that stretched for miles. The city of Petrograd was ready to explode. On February 23, International Women's Day, thousands of women marched through the streets demanding bread. The protests grew. Factory workers joined. Then students. Then soldiers. Within days, the streets were filled with hundreds of thousands shouting one word: "Down with the Tsar!" The army that once protected the throne now turned against it. Soldiers joined the crowds. Police stations were overrun. The royal government collapsed. On March 2, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne. 3 centuries of Romanov rule ended in silence, with a single pen stroke. But Russia's victory was only half won. The Tsar was gone, but chaos had only begun. In his place rose 2 rival powers: the provisional government, made of nobles and liberals trying to save democracy, and the Soviets, made up of workers and soldiers demanding real power. The people wanted peace, bread, and land. The provisional government offered speeches, promises, and delay. And far away, in a small Swiss apartment, Lenin heard the news. The Tsar is gone. With German help, Lenin returned to Russia in April 1917, stepping off the train like a man reborn. His message was simple and dangerous. All power to the Soviets! Crowds cheered. His words spread faster than bullets. Lenin called for an immediate end to the war, land for the peasants, and factories for the workers. His enemies called him a traitor, but the hungry, desperate masses called him hope. That summer, Russia burned again. Protests erupted across Petrograd. The soldiers were tired of fighting. The workers were tired of waiting. The provisional government responded with arrests, censorship, and confusion. And in the shadows, Lenin and the Bolsheviks prepared for their final move. On the night of October 25, 1917, Red Guards, loyal to the Bolsheviks, quietly took control of key points across Petrograd, the bridges, the railway stations, the telegraph office. The Winter Palace, seat of the government, was surrounded. At 2 a.m., the palace was stormed. The ministers were arrested. No grand battle. No roaring flames. Just silence, and the sound of history shifting forever. By morning, the Bolsheviks held power. Lenin stood before the Soviet Congress and declared, "We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order." But Russia's nightmare was far from over. Civil war erupted. The Red Army fought the White forces, monarchists, capitalists, and foreign powers, in a brutal struggle that lasted years. Villages were burned. Millions died. The country fell into darkness. Yet by 1922, Lenin's Red Army had won. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, was born. A new world power had risen from the ashes of empire. The revolution had promised equality and freedom. But soon, it became clear that power, once taken, is never easily shared. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin seized control, turning the dream of revolution into an iron-fisted regime that ruled by fear. Still, the events of 1917 changed everything. They inspired revolutions across the world, redefined politics, and created a century-long struggle between capitalism and communism. From the blood-stained snow of Petrograd to the walls of the Kremlin, the Russian Revolution proved one truth: when people have nothing left to lose, even empires can fall. And so ended the age of the Tsars, and began the age of ideology. If you like this type of historical videos, then subscribe the channel and don't forget to like this video.